The spring thaw in upstate New York usually brings the smell of wet earth and the sound of dripping eaves. But for the quiet cul-de-sac on Miller's Lane, it brought a discovery that defied any rational explanation. When the local sheriff finally forced open the front door of the Miller residence, he didn't find a ransacked home or signs of a struggle. Instead, he found an immaculate suburban house where the heat was still humming at a steady 70 degrees. In the kitchen, the stainless steel refrigerator was stocked with fresh milk, eggs, and enough frozen meat to last a month. Yet, in the middle of this abundance, the bodies of David, Sarah, and their 2 children were found huddled in the living room, having succumbed to literal, agonizing starvation. The nightmare had started 3 months earlier during the Great Blizzard of 25. It was a whiteout so dense that the local snowplow drivers couldn't see the hoods of their own trucks. One driver, struggling to clear the main artery, inadvertently pushed a massive 10-foot wall of heavy, wet ice and packed snow directly against the Millers' only exit. The driveway vanished, and the front of the house was encased in a frozen tomb that hardened into something as solid as concrete within hours.
I remember telling Sarah that we should just treat it like an unexpected vacation. We had power. The pantry was full of Costco hauls, and the kids were actually excited to miss school. We figured the county would be by in a day or 2 to dig us out. But then the cell service bars dropped to nothing, and the Wi-Fi router started blinking that hollow red light. A transformer must have blown a couple of miles down the road, taking the local tower with it. We were cut off, but we weren't worried. Not yet. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning on the 3rd night when I went upstairs to check the guest room window. The snow wall reached halfway up the 2nd story, glowing and eerie, bruised blue under the moonlight. That's when I saw him. A dark silhouette was perched right on top of the ridge, maybe 15 feet away from the glass. He was just standing there, motionless, dressed in a heavy coat that didn't seem to catch the wind. He wasn't waving for help or trying to get my attention. He was just staring straight into the house. I tried to break the window in the master bedroom to shout to him, but the glass didn't even chip. We'd spent $40,000 on those Smart Shield hurricane-grade windows last year, and they were designed to withstand a Category 5 storm. Between the reinforced frames and the thick layer of ice that had glazed over the exterior, the house had become a pressurized vault. I went up to the attic to try the skylight, but the weight of the snow above was too much. It was like trying to lift a mountain. We were trapped in a perfect, climate-controlled box, and that man on the ridge was the only person who knew we were alive. Except, he didn't move. He just watched. The silhouette didn't leave when the sun came up. Even during the day, I could see that dark shape through the frosted glass, shifting positions every few hours. By the 2nd week, he began appearing at different points around the house. One night he was perched on the snowbank outside the kitchen, and the next, he'd be hovering near the bathroom vent. He never made a sound. He just stood there in the freezing wind, perfectly still, illuminated by the pale moonlight reflecting off the drifts. I started keeping the lights off so he couldn't see us, but that only made his presence feel heavier.
I started a journal because the silence was becoming too loud. I wrote down the dates, but mostly I wrote about the food. We had cans of soup, boxes of pasta, and a freezer full of steak, but none of us could touch it. Every time I reached for a plate, I could feel his eyes burning through the reinforced glass. felt like a violation to chew. Like he was waiting for us to show any sign of life or vulnerability. David and the kids felt it too. We'd sit at the kitchen table with the lights off, staring at the pantry door, while our stomachs cramped with hunger. We weren't just trapped. We were being judged. My last entry for that week was just one sentence. We can't eat, because he watches every time we open our mouths.
On day 22, the hum of the heater finally died. The power lines miles away must have finally snapped under the weight of the ice. The house stayed warm for a few hours, but then the cold began to seep in through the floorboards. That was the night the figure moved. He wasn't on the snow ridge anymore. I woke up to see a dark mass pressed directly against the bedroom window, only an inch of glass separating his face from mine. I couldn't see his features, just the outline of a hooded head. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just pulled the covers up and waited for the sun.
The family's behavior took a sharp, clinical turn toward the extreme. To avoid being noticed by the watcher, they stopped speaking entirely. They communicated through frantic hand gestures and hushed whispers that eventually faded into total silence. They spent their days sitting perfectly still in the living room, wrapped in wool blankets, becoming living statues. They believed that if they didn't move, the man outside would lose interest and leave. When the forensic team entered the living room months later, the first thing they noticed wasn't the bodies, but the walls. Every square inch of the designer wallpaper was covered in frantic, hand-scratched notations made with charcoal from the fireplace or even fingernails. The walls were a meticulous log of the shadow's movements. One entry from February 14th read, 1 a.m. He is at the south pane. 2 a.m. He shifted 3 inches to the left. 3 a.m. He is breathing on the glass. The investigators found it chilling because, according to the official weather records, there hadn't been a single footprint detected in that area for weeks. Yet the Millers had documented every move of a frozen, motionless figure. The investigation took a haunting turn when technicians recovered the hard drive from the home's autonomous security system. The cameras, powered by a backup solar battery on the roof, had been recording the entire 3-month period in high-definition infrared. The detectives gathered in the precinct to watch the footage, expecting to finally identify the stalker who had terrorized the family. Instead, they watched hours of empty, pristine snow. For 90 days, the white ridge outside the master bedroom remained undisturbed. No hooded figure ever climbed the mound. No stranger ever approached the glass. According to the digital record, there was absolutely no one outside. On the footage from the 40th night, a small, dark shape appeared from a crawl space near the foundation. A narrow ventilation shaft David had manually widened. A man emerged, dressed in a heavy, dark parka with the hood pulled tight. It was David. In a state of total sleepwalking psychosis, he climbed to the top of the snow wall and stood there for 6 hours, staring directly into his own bedroom. He was the silhouette. He was the shadow. Every night, he would exit through the secret hatch he had subconsciously created, stand in the sub-zero temperatures until his limbs were blue, and then crawl back inside to tell his wife about the monster watching them. His mind had split so deeply from the isolation that he had forgotten his own midnight excursions. The medical examiners labeled the case a textbook example of folie à deux, or shared delusional disorder, taken to a lethal extreme. The psychological pressure of being buried alive, combined with the lack of sensory input and the loss of sleep, created a feedback loop. Sarah and the children didn't just believe David. They began to see the shadow too. Their brains conjuring the same hallucination to make sense of the terror in David's eyes. David had unintentionally become his own family's executioner, paralyzing them with a fear so primal that they chose to starve rather than be seen consuming by the man on the ridge. The most disturbing piece of evidence was found tucked under the mattress of the youngest child's bed. It was a single sheet of paper from a coloring book, dated just days before the end. The handwriting was shaky and small. It read,
"Daddy came back inside from the cold tonight. He's sitting with us now and trying to make us stay quiet. But I'm looking out the window, and I can still see the other daddy standing on the snow. The other daddy looks hungrier."
The Miller case remains a grim reminder of the fragile nature of the human psyche when stripped of social connection. In an era where we are more connected than ever, a family was erased from existence just a few hundred feet from their neighbors. They weren't killed by a ghost or a predator, but by the crushing weight of silence and a mind that turned inward until it broke. We live in a world where you can be buried in plain sight, and as long as your lawn is mowed or your snow is deep, no one thinks to check if you're still breathing behind the glass. Thanks for listening until the very end. It's scary how our own minds can turn against us when we're all alone. What would you do if you were trapped in your house for months? Would you trust your own eyes? If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Stay safe out there, and keep an eye on your neighbors. Check out the other stories on this channel for more true horror. This was an original story written just for you. See you in the next one.